Good evening, friends. Welcome to Alpha Accurate Advisors AAA Winner Series webinar. As you are aware, this is part of our Investor Connect program, whereby we started conducting this Winner Series webinar in which we invite founders and senior management of the companies in which we have invested and trying to understand from their perspective the trends, the analysis and insights. Before I start this webinar, let me also give a disclaimer clause. This webinar is solely for the information purpose and do not constitute any offer, recommendation or invitation to purchase or subscribe for any securities, and shall not form the basis or be relied upon in any connection with any contract or binding commitment whatsoever. Certain matters discussed in this webinar may contain statements regarding the company's market opportunity and business prospects that are individually and collectively forward-looking statements. Such forward-looking statements are not guarantees of future performance and are subject to known and unknown risks, uncertainties, and assumptions that are difficult to predict. With that, disclaimer, let me give a brief introduction of Mr. Radhesh, Managing Director of Navin Flourine. Friends, specialty chemical sector is one of the favorite sector of our PMS. We have been invested in this sector from almost last, I would say, 3 to 4 years. And of course, it has been a very, very handsome, rewarding journey for us and for our investors. It is a topic in which, when during the last quarterly conference call, when we had the special session on specialty chemical, we have been really overwhelmed by kind of response what we have received from our investors and kind of a questions what investors asked us during that particular conference call. That made us to probably one more step in the direction whereby we thought, let's invite the industry veteran and let's understand from the veterans that how do they see the specialty chemical, the opportunities, the challenges, the trends and insights. And who else can be better than Mr. Radhesh, the Managing Director of Navin Flourine International. He is a mechanical engineer from National Institute of Technology, Masters of International Business from IIFT and MBA from IMD, Lausanne, Switzerland. He has handled many functions ranging from innovation to sales, to marketing, to corporate strategy, and to manufacturing across multiple geographies in his career spanning 24 plus years. In his previous role, he was at a senior position with Lakshmi Organics and also with James Huber Corporation. With that, let me take this opportunity to invite Mr. Radhesh. Welcome, sir.
All right, good evening to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Radhesh. Thank you very much, first of all, for your valuable time and accepting this invitation. Navin Flourine is been part of our portfolio since last almost 4 years. And in last particularly 5 to 7 years, if I look at Navin Flourine, its sales increased from 600 crores to 1400 crores. Its net profit jumped almost, I would say probably more than 5 times, from 50 crores to 265 crores. And its market cap probably is one of the best wealth creator in the country. In last 10 years, its market cap went up by 70 times, 70, and in last 7 years by 22 times. So I'm sure there are so many secrets which probably we would like to know from your side, that what is that secret sauce of Navin Flourine International. With that, let me start the ball rolling, and let me put it in this way that I think there are so many investors, they always ask all different types of questions. So what I will do is that I will divide it in 3 parts. In part 1, probably briefly, we'll try to understand a little bit about the general specialty chemical industry. In part 2, we will try to understand a little bit about the fluorine industry, the expertise of Navin. And in part 3, we'll try to understand a little bit more about Navin Flourine strategy over last 5 years and next 5 years to make it a decadal company probably to hold in the portfolio. I hope that flow is fine to you, sir.
Perfect.
Super. So, sir, the specialty chemical industry whenever I discuss this industry with many of the companies, the many players globally and locally both, traditionally, India has been considered as a low volume and high value market, a really specialty market, versus China, which is considered as a more of a high volume and low value market. What is the industry in how it is placed right now? Just wanted to understand the tailwinds and headwinds for the industry. And if you look at India versus China, from that low value, high volume to India market like high value, low volume, how do you think it is positioned now over next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, hi, good evening. And first of all, thank you very much for having me here. Before I get into the specifics, I think it's important for everyone to understand what is specialty chemicals, right? A lot of times we tend to use this word specialty chemicals, but if you actually look at the entire spectrum, on one side you have, starting from petrochemicals, you have bulk chemicals, then you have what we call fine chemicals, and then we have ingredient slash polymer. You could actually call that as performance chemical. So that piece is what drives the performance, and the fine chemical space is what enables that performance. And typically when we talk about specialty chemicals, we're primarily talking about the middle chunk, which is the fine chemical piece. And specialty really depends on how you drive the business. Sometimes you actually drive the fine chemical business like it's a commodity business. Sometimes you actually drive it as if it was a specialty chemical business. The comparison that you just made, between India and China, I don't think it's as clear or as homogeneous, because you actually find examples both in India as well as China of both. If you actually look at this particular space today, and maybe let's say a year, from a year back, or at least for a foreseeable future, could be 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, you'll actually see three dominant themes emerging. And each of these themes presents tailwind as well as headwinds, depending on how you position yourself. One, there's this big dominant theme around sustainability, right? So now when you talk about sustainability, again, you can further divide that into what and how. What products you make, how much of green chemistry is involved there, and what kind of processes you follow, what is your overall philosophy around how you handle solvents, what kind of solvents you handle. And then there are a few things around how, in terms of how you actually, what do you do with your effluent, what's your philosophy around effluent, are you today even talking about effluent management, or are you talking about reduction at source, etc., etc. So the first dominant theme is around sustainability. The second dominant theme is around supply chain reconfiguration. And there, I think, again, India is very uniquely placed. If you look at, let's say, 5 years back, there used to be two very clear categories. There was things which are happening in the Eastern Hemisphere, and there were things which are happening in the Western Hemisphere. Eastern Hemisphere primarily was a cost arbitrage game. Western Hemisphere was primarily a technology arbitrage game. And what we really see now happening, and it likely to only accelerate over the next few years, is that India will be uniquely positioned at the intersection of both, which is cost arbitrage as well as technology arbitrage. And hence you will actually see significant supply piece moving both from Eastern Hemisphere as well as Western Hemisphere into India. And that is why, whenever people actually talk about China plus one, I always feel that actually the right level is India is the one. Rather than actually constantly comparing ourselves with China. And the third dominant theme is around solutions mindset. And if you look at each of these themes, you could actually see that they actually belong to need of the market as well as specific ask from the customers. Now, when I talk about solutions mindset, you could be today supplying a product or a service. What is really important is that how well do you really understand the pain point of your customer, and how are you able to convert that into a solution. Now that solution could be in terms of the product that you supply or a service that you supply. And each of these would as much be a headwind as it is a tailwind, depending on how you position yourself.
Sure. I think you have raised a very valid point that future is all about sustainability and green. And you also talked about interesting point that India is probably at the inflection point whereby we can get the benefit of both Eastern and Western Hemisphere. In that, just continuing from where you left, the sourcing strategy. You said that from the supply chain perspective, India is uniquely placed. So what is the global customer, because you deal with the best of the customers globally, what is their view on, say, India 3 years back compared to where it is today? What are the changes? Are there any change in mindset? If yes, what they are looking from India in terms of scale, what kind of confidence they have in Indian suppliers?
So I think, given the fact that, if you look at the chemical space, it's a pretty wide space, right? It actually goes across a lot of segments, right? From pharma, agro, to personal care, to construction, chemical, etc. So it will be a little difficult to actually give a generic response, but let me try to. See, earlier what used to happen is, let's say 5 years back, and almost let's say 10 years back, I was on the other side of the table. I was in US, working for a US company, trying to source from India, China, etc. And now I'm on this side of the table. And what I generally see is that, as I talked about the distinction between Western Hemisphere and Eastern Hemisphere, typically, the customers, the large multinational customers, used to look at partners in Western Hemisphere as those molecules and opportunities were at the starting point of their life cycle. And as the molecules progressed, they were launched into the market. China actually came in as probably the first commercial supplier. As the molecule further progressed, they would possibly look at India as a third or fourth supplier. From there on, today, what's going on is that a lot of these, very well-known global multinationals are actually looking at Indian companies right at the front end of that life cycle. So they are actually looking at Indian companies as technology development partners. So, so we actually engage with these companies in the initial research activities, then the development piece as the molecule gets scaled up. And hence we almost get first right of refusal as the molecule commercializes. So typically what happens is, by doing that, the margin profile of your business significantly changes. Also, the business tends to be a lot more sticky because, the engagement period with the customer, with the same customer for the same molecule, tends to be significantly longer. So, the earning visibility, tends to be very good. And also, as I said earlier, the margin profile tends to be extremely good.
Super. I think that basically narrates the very well that how the Indian specialty chemical probably is doing huge capital expenditure over next 3, 5, 10 years, because they can clearly see the visibility from the customers. So when I look at Indian specialty chemical industry, typically as an investor, if I buy, for example, Dow Chemical, or if I buy, say, for example, BASF, or if I buy the companies like Clarion, in probably one company, I get 6 chemistries, Whereas in India, for every chemistry, there are probably only 2 players. So if is a Flourine, of course, you have a Navin Flourine and SRF. If it is a benzene base, probably it's RT, and so on and so forth. So the scale, why it is like this? Is that the scale in India is a very difficult task? What is the challenge? Why not we have one company like, Dow Chemical or BASF, where we can have 5 chemistry? What stops Indian entrepreneur? Is it capital, or is it a mindset?
So I think if you just kind of look at the history, right, a lot of these examples that you gave, these companies, first of all, have been around for a long period of time. Okay, they always had a global mindset, and they always operated out of geographies where the local demand was very high. So, to begin with, India didn't have that luxury of having a great big, local demand. So, so we always, if we had to go for scale, we always had to depend on exports. Also, a lot of us were, as you rightly said, we didn't have the scale to begin with. But I would be actually surprised if in the next 10 years, we actually don't see at least a few of these large companies emerging out of India. That could be either by focusing on a mixture of chemistries, as you talked about, or could be by focusing on similar set of chemistries, but by looking at multiple application segments. So if you ask me today, clearly capital or access to capital is not the bottleneck. There are obviously some other pieces to that, but I would be very surprised if we don't have at least a few companies emerging out of India in the next decade who actually really become global dominant players in their respective fields.
Oh wow, that sounds surely very promising. And just continuing with that, if I look at the nature of Indian specialty chemical players, correct me if I'm wrong, that earlier it was more like a catalog kind of a companies, catalog chemicals. You go with a basket of products. You can say, hey, I have probably these 10 products which I can offer to you. Is it now moving to the stage whereby it is a more solution-based approach, or it is a more like a commercial kind of an approach whereby the scale is different, is a more kind of a proven, or is it like still a blend of two? How that is moving?
No, I think it's still blend of two. I don't think the Indian companies have moved to the other side yet. Even in the way Indian companies function today, they do function more like what you just now described in terms of catalog. Now, the catalog could be either in terms of the products they offer, or could be catalog in terms of a wide range of application segments they supply to, or could be the range of chemistries that they supply to. See, what is important is that if the companies have to really grow, scale, and continue to get the kind of continue to have strong margin profile, they will need to have a strong starting point, and that comes through having extremely strong value proposition in an area that matters. Okay, so for example, you talk about Flourine, right? You need to have a very strong starting point there of having a very long years of experience in an area that matters. There's no point in having a strong value proposition in a segment or a value chain which just does not matter. Sure. Once you have that, you can continue to build on that. Once you have one leg very strongly grounded, either in a particular value chain or in a particular application segment. But today, I would say some companies, I see that they have clearly recognized what that value proposition should be and are already looking to grow on the foundation that they have set for themselves. But I would say by and large, if you look at the Indian chemical industry, majority of them still have the catalog model as described by you.
I see. So, Radhesh, you just mentioned that in 10 years, you will be surprised if you don't see companies like Dow Chemical, multiple chemistries companies in India, maybe in about 10, 12 years. Which are those particular chemistries where you think India has a scope to have the global players, Indian global players?
I think they would be in range. So there are two, again, ways of looking at it, right? One, they could be product driven. So where you either talk about chemistry or technology platform, or it could be application driven, right? So I would like to assume that there would be a large Indian company or a company coming out of India, let's say for example in care chemical space, focusing on personal care, hair care, etc., which has got that solutions mindset, really becoming, gathering a global scale. If you look at the product or chemistry, one of the chemistry that we are in, for example, Flourine, clearly has a potential to achieve global scale. So there are a number of those, they could be either product/chemistry based or could be application based.
Perfect. Perfect. So that brings me to the start of probably part two, and probably you already ended the part one, whereby you mentioned that fluorine is one segment where probably India can have the global player in making. So can you give a little bit more color on this fluorine? Because fluorine industry, of course, the fluorospar and fluorocarbon, and there are a number of applications within that. The gases and non-gases within that specialty, and many more subsegments. So how do you see internally the fluorine, industry? How do you see internally the sub-segments of the industry, and which are the segments probably which are fast growing compared to the segments which are, slow growing?
So, I think if you look at the fluorine value chain, right? I mean, you start from fluorspar, right? Within fluorspar also, you primarily focus on the acid spar, which actually goes into manufacturing HF and then the downstream molecules. Now, if you look at the fluorspar, it's approximately about, last year it was approximately about 4.8 million metric tons, okay, in terms of volume. And which basically then translates to approximately about 2.2 million metric tons HF, hydrofluoric acid, which is the base molecule for everything that you do in the fluorine value chain. Now, if you see where does that go, it's primarily goes, or it went into three segments. It went into aluminum trifluoride, ALF3. It went into fluorocarbons, primarily into refrigerant gas space, and then we had a lot of these fluoropolymers, right? Then you had a lot of other relatively smaller spaces like pharmaceutical, agrochemicals, etc., etc. Now, if you look at the future, you actually see there are a lot of micro markets within those that have great future. I mean, some of the pieces that we, let's say, focus on, right? Pharmaceuticals, agrochemicals. Now, each of these, just to take example of, agro and pharma, just the fluoro intermediate space is about $4 billion plus in each of them. So pharma as well as agro. Agro is a little more consolidated, pharma is extremely fragmented, but that's the kind of opportunity. And you'll actually see in any of the spaces you look at, the opportunity headroom is significant. So I think what is important is that even when you look at the fluorine, you realize that that space is huge. So it's important that it's not it's not whether you play in ABC or XYZ. It's what is more important is you decide which ABC you want to play in, and really understand why. What does it really take? What does it take to win in ABC? And really ensure that you develop the capabilities to win in those ABC segments and then play your cards accordingly.
So basically, clearly, as you rightly said, I think each segment creates itself is a huge opportunity. Like pharma itself, you said about $4 billion, and same is probably for agrochemical and many more such micro segments. So are we seeing the increasing use of fluorine in such kind of an application, whether it is a pharma or whether it is a agrochemical? So in last 10 years, the kind of science which has advanced, are you seeing more of fluorine as a usage, and do you think that trend to continue?
Yes, so fluorine is an extremely versatile molecule. As you might know, it's the most electronegative molecule, right? And there are very strong reasons why it is used in pharma, why it is used in agrochemicals. If you see out of the new molecules that get launched in pharma, almost 25% of that have fluorine in it. If you see in agrochemicals, it's similar percentage. And that has been the trend. That trend is going to continue, right? But interestingly, if you take any of the newer applications, you talk about energy storage solutions, or semiconductor space, you see a lot of fluorine actually being used even in those applications. So not only in the traditional application segment, but also in some of these newer segments, you clearly see application of fluorine, and we believe that the growth of fluorine molecules in both these legacy segments as well as this newer segment will continue.
I see. So, you mentioned about, pharma, agro, and of course, the kind of a new segments where, whether it's energy storage and many more, like semiconductor. So to be successful in this fluorine industry, how do you see, what are the key important, parameters which you think is very important for any player to be successful in the fluorine chemistry? Is it a backward integration, or is it a backward and forward integration, both? What kind of a R&D support is required? What kind of a constant product launches and product application support is required? And to do that, whether Indian companies have enough muscle to do the same.
Yeah, so any of these, I always try or always tend to divide this into what and how, right? R&D or the technology, etc., falls under the how. I think what is more important is first you need to define what, and then the how follows.
Sure.
So when you look at what, I again tend to, and this is like a framework that we adopt inside the company. We just look at the 3 P's, right? Product, platform, and partnership. Now, when you look at the product, what is extremely important in any of these segments is that you have to choose the value chains that you want to play in. And once you decide that these are the value chains that you want to play in, ensure that you own the value chain. Okay, because if you are going to be dependent on the building block there, on someone, either in India or in China or elsewhere, then it's not going to be possible for you to own that value chain, and you cannot build a sustainable business model. So A, on the product, and that goes into your backward integration point. So it's very important that A, you select the right value chains and ensure that you own those value chains. Then the second point is around platform. The platform can be chemistry based or a technology based, that is engineering based. And again, select the right platforms and then ensure that you actually have a global leadership in those platforms that you have chosen. And the third piece, which is partnership in the segments that you want to play, pick the right partners and go deep with those. And these 3 things that I talked about, these are not mutually exclusive, right? One leads to another, another leads to another, etc., and it almost becomes like a self-iterative process. So if this becomes your framework, and then for you to be able to do that to win, then you require to address the how. Some of the pieces that you talked about in terms of technology capabilities, in terms of project capabilities, which is execution capabilities, etc., it is part of that how.
Sure. So in what, you mentioned, and in your presentation also, I think you keep talking about the 3 P's, product, platform, and partnership. Getting a little bit more, detail into each of that P. In product, you said that you need to choose the right value chain, and then you need to own the value chain. And of course, you cannot be dependent on someone else, because that will jeopardize their entire, the long-term sustainability. So when you select this value chain, the complexity of that value chain is something which is most important. Am I right? Correct me if I'm wrong.
Sure.
And if you want to own that value chain, so you need to go to the different stages of backward integration. At times, it is, of course, one is technical capability, and second is, as you want to go more and more backward, probably it may take more and more resources. And at times, the backward integration also may result into the, what I would say, buy versus, make versus outsource kind of thing. So how internally you look at, this thing? Can you give a little bit more color into the first P of this?
Yeah, sure. So I think you're absolutely right. And it also goes back to one point that you earlier made, which is around scale. So, if you actually need, if you want to focus on a particular value chain, it's also important that you acquire a certain scale in that value chain. So the value chain, let us assume that, you have decided to focus on these 4 market segments. Then the value chain should be such that, it plays into all the 4 market segments, and hence gives you a certain scale to be able to own that value chain. And in each of them, when you say own the value chain, doesn't necessarily mean that you will actually be manufacturing each element in that value chain. So to your point, it's absolutely important that you have to select the right partners to work with so far as owning that particular value chain. We not only look at partners in India, but you'd be actually surprised that some of our partners, even for our building blocks, are actually based out of Europe. So they've actually, we along with our partners have gone to our end customers and said, okay, this is how we are actually going to play in this particular value chain, and we together believe that we have a unique value proposition for you. And when you are actually playing in a particular value chain, our philosophy always has been to be as transparent as possible. So when we actually go to the end customer, we always tell them who we are partnering with. And typically, a lot of times we actually go together to the end customer. So it actually becomes a true partnership in that particular sense. But you're absolutely right. When we talk about owning the value chain, doesn't necessarily mean you're owning each of the pieces in the value chain, but you have right partnerships, and you, along with your partnership, basically controls that value chain.
That really explains very well the first P. And the second P, which is a platform. So at times, when you talk about platform, the chemistry versus the engineering side of it, that is a little bit more technical for probably people like us who are more into finance and capital market. So can you give a little bit more insight into this, the platform side, that what exactly, so when you look at the platform, how you go about it? And as you rightly said, all are not mutually exclusive. So, what then goes into it while selecting the platform?
So I think when you look at the platform, there are two parts to the platform, right? One is chemistry, another is engineering. Now, chemistry, I think piece is very well understood because that's around R&D, innovation, etc. But there is also the innovation around engineering side. Okay, because traditionally, a lot of companies in India have been very strong on the chemistry side, but not as strong on the engineering side. What does that mean? Suppose if there is a chemistry in the lab which works fantastically, how are you actually going to really scale up? And that scale up actually poses a lot of challenge. So what is an engineering solution, unique engineering solution that you can come up with, by which you can take that particular process from the lab and make it work in the plant? So what's your philosophy around use of utilities, around the effluent, the byproduct generation, co-product generation, etc., etc. Again, within Flourine, even on the chemistry side, there are a number of chemistries within Flourine, right? So either just in Flourine or adjacent to Flourine, there are a lot of interesting chemistries wherein you could actually say, okay, this is a bolt-on chemistry, which if you actually bring on board, there could be a lot of interesting opportunities at the intersection of Flourine and this particular chemistry. And then you go to the customer and say that, okay, I'm not only, I don't only have Flourine, but also this other chemistry. And hence you become very uniquely positioned, because for customer, they typically don't find companies, who can operate at that intersection.
Oh, wow, that's interesting. Can you share some, example, may not be, future example, maybe the past example, if it is permissible?
So, there are a number of examples, but the one example that I've spoken about in the past, I can give you, and this is not something that we have worked on, but there are opportunities there. So that is Flourine and ketene.
Okay.
Right. So if you have both these capabilities and you have very deep expertise and knowledge in both, okay, you can actually play at the intersection of ketene and Flourine.
Okay.
Right. And there are some molecules that today are made by, let's say, one company in the world, which actually can do both, right? Now, even in Flourine, that company is not really backward integrated, and that company has actually gone through some challenges, etc., in the last few years. So even that company is not uniquely positioned today to offer this value proposition. So if you could actually bring that value proposition on board, that could be a great service to the customer. So similarly, what we do is that, just to give you an example, we are world's largest manufacturer of BF3 gas, boron trifluoride. Earlier, we used to actually supply it as a product. Now, what we have started looking at is there a way that we can actually supply that, to take that to the customer as a service. So in your chemical synthesis, what having boron trifluoride in your portfolio does to you. So we've actually started looking at taking a lot of chemistries, the roots of synthesis, and moving them to BF3 gas, because again, we are uniquely positioned in that regards. And we are now started seeing in the last 1 year, some opportunities actually emerging because of that value proposition.
I see.
So I think again goes back to one of the points I made earlier, which is around solutions mindset. If you really understand what see, earlier what used to happen was most of the companies, including us, our business model was very inquiry driven. So a company will come, give you an inquiry. Even today, you will see a lot of companies talk about we received 15 inquiries in a month. Now you have to move from inquiry driven model to a service oriented model, right? Where you actually create these platforms and go to the customer and have a discussion with the customer in terms of what is the unique problem that they are having and how can you address that pain point through these platforms that you have.
Great. Yeah, I think it opens up completely adjacent segments. So to that extent, you can penetrate your customer better, and at the same time, you can expand the market share as well as wallet share. So yes, you are absolutely right.
Sorry to interrupt you, and I think it does two other things, right? The quality of the engagement becomes very different.
True.
And the second point, which is if not more equally important, is the people that you are interacting with, inside your customer's organization also tend to be very different. So instead of talking just to, let's say, sourcing manager or just to R&D manager inside your customer's organization, now you're talking to the business manager who's actually living that pain today. In some cases, though some of our customers are global multinationals, our conversation typically happens with the CEO of those companies, because that pain which that company is going through has actually reached even the CEO of those companies. And when we go with this unique solution, it actually reaches the CEO level. So the quality of engagement and the level of engagement completely changes. That positions you very differently from other partners.
Yeah, I think you have probably hit the nail that, what is most important is the deeper customer engagement, and that too, moment you go to the more at the senior level, that leads to probably the new set of growth opportunities. So with that, probably, in fact, we already started the strategy of discussing, strategy of Navin Flourine. So if I look at Navin Flourine history, it has successfully transited from, refrigerant gas-based company to a specialty chemical company. Correct me if I'm wrong, your refrigerant gas volume, as I say, has came down significantly, from probably more than 50% to less than 20% in last about 10, 12 years. And during the same time frame, your specialty chemical revenue mix has moved up from close to 25% to 40%. So, what is the strategy from here on, combining with your 3P approach, going by your engagements with your customers, going by kind of platforms what you are selecting, what kind of opportunity you are seeing for Navin Flourine to play in this entire landscape?
So actually, if you, going forward, we believe that we will basically have three verticals. Mm-hmm. The first one, what we call specialty today, will basically be the contract manufacturing service arm. Where we provide contract manufacturing services to agrochemical companies and companies in the industrial segment. Now, industrial segment is basically anything which is non-agro, non-pharma. So, but basically it's a service-oriented model. The second one will be the CDMO piece, which is the current CRAMS piece, where we are primarily focusing on the innovators, pharma innovators. That's a product plus service model. And the third one will be HPP, which will be a pure product model. Okay. And what we are actually looking to do is that take the current refrigerant gas and inorganic piece. Some of these pieces also have a lot of growth opportunities. Roll that under HPP because there's a lot of interdependence between each of these three segments. So we will have these three verticals, and each of these three verticals, one is service oriented, one is product plus service oriented, another is only product oriented, will require a very different mindset and will have different strategy, a different growth strategy. But in each of them, we are actually seeing strong growth. I mean, one of the things that you talked about, which is the contract factory services piece, which is the specialty piece, which is where a lot of our capexes have already been announced. So there, the growth trajectory is pretty well known because, when we have announced the capexes, we have actually talked going on the CDMO side where, we talk to, we work with all these innovative pharma companies, and similarly on HPP, so in the erstwhile inorganic fluorochemicals, we are actually seeing some really interesting opportunities, both fluorine based as well as outside of fluorine. So we've actually also started looking at those opportunities going into similar segments and again in HPP. And as I've mentioned before, even outside of our legacy market segments, we are seeing a lot of opportunities, and all those will actually reside under HPP. So we'll actually kind of incubate a lot of newer opportunities under HPP.
Wow. So basically, in fact, that will further, de-risk, Navin Flourine from the chemistry perspective.
Yeah, I mean, the intention is that, because we are very clear that as we move forward, there will be a number of other players who will want to get into fluorine. And what we do today, is something which probably they would try to replicate in the next 2 to 3 years. And it's just a matter of time before, they are also able to acquire the level of expertise we today have. It might not happen next year, but could happen 3 years down the line. And while that happens, it's important that we travel up the value curve so that the delta which exists today continues to exist as we move forward. So that will be either in terms of capability gain, market share gain in the existing markets, and as well as entry into some of these newer market segments.
And how important, as you try to do one ladder up in terms of the value chain, I'm sure the role of R&D would be very, very crucial. So what are the efforts on R&D side? Where are we positioned today, and how do you plan to ramp up that over next 2, 3, 4 years?
So I think when you look at the technology part, there are 2 parts to that. One is the R&D and other is the T&D. So one is the chemistry piece, another is the engineering piece, and both these arms are equally important. Now T&D, we didn't even have that organization. Today we have more than 100 people in that organization. Similarly, R&D, we continue to invest and grow the R&D function. We today have R&D in 3 locations. We are actually looking at possibility of even having an application lab. So we continue to do, we have been traditionally strong on the chemistry side, which means not just fluorine, but also the adjacent chemistries. What we have not been as strong in is the application piece. So that is what we are, because if we really have to grow as strongly as we want to grow in HPP, it will be important for us to have very strong application piece. And that is what, from the R&D side, we will actually continue to, and that is what we will be investing in significantly going forward.
I see. So, when another related question, since we're talking about the competitive positioning, what is the Navin Flourine USP when you compare with the, the global players? And do you have any kind of a, probably, business model of, say, globally, which probably you think is the right model to look at and, maybe learn from it and maybe try to replicate part of it?
Yeah, so there are a number of global companies that we admire. I don't think there is any company that I can say this is the model that I want to replicate, but there are a lot of pieces residing in a lot of good global companies. There could be either European companies or there are 1 or 2 even Chinese companies who are doing amazingly well in the space that matters to us, which is fluorine and adjacent to fluorine. And we continue to pick what they do well and try to bring that into the organization. And by the way, some of these companies we also partner with. So we have excellent relationship with some of these companies, and we continue to work very closely with them on some co-development projects as well. So it's not that we only compete with some of these companies, and that is the reason why we know these companies extremely well in terms of how they think, how they operate, etc. Now, from the point of view of differentiation, I think it basically has multiple things to it, right? One, I think you need to have a very clear point of view about the future, in terms of what the future is going to look like and what is it that you're going to do to get there. And as a subset of that, what is going to be your value proposition to be able to get there or to be able to provide solutions to the customers that matter. And then you have to make sure that your entire business model is engineered accordingly. So your demand generation pieces, like could be R&D, T&D, etc., and also the demand fulfillment pieces, in terms of execution excellence in projects, in operations, logistics, etc. So both these pieces we continue to focus on, demand generation piece and demand fulfillment piece, and we tend to learn from a lot of these global companies, in both these aspects. Not just global, even in India, there are companies that we admire and we continue to learn from them.
Sure. So basically, from your competitiveness perspective, one is, of course, what you talked about. The cost parameter, how important is that from the global customer perspective? Of course, you need to be cost competitive, but how important is cost? Is it like when they compare the cost versus A versus B, compared to say 3 years back, they might be sourcing something from China, something from India, compared to that right now where it is today. Can you give some ballpark there? How India is positioned right now, particularly for companies like Navin?
So when we have conversations with our customers for new opportunities, they could be either new opportunities for us, but old opportunity for the company, or could be a new opportunity for us and a new opportunity for our customers. Typically, cost is not something that we talk about on day one. So the first discussion is around what kind of capabilities do we need to be able to succeed in that opportunity. So, R&D, T&D, etc. that we talked about, the chemistry, engineering platform. The second thing, which is extremely important for them, is sustainability. Okay, because a lot of these companies are not only focusing on cost of today, but also cost of 3 years down the line and 5 years down the line. And if they believe that if you don't have a really strong a clear strategy around sustainability, some of that could also be around the value chain strategy that we talked about earlier. They know that today you might be able to offer a far superior cost, but 2 years down the line, you might not be as competitive. So the second piece, which is around sustainability, becomes extremely important. And the third piece is the talent that they engage with, the quality of people, and just the trust that they feel from day one. I think those are primarily the first three things that our customers look at. And probably, number 4 or 5 would be cost. Of course, you need to be cost competitive, but I don't think that's something that, today company that's not the first 2 or 3 things that the company looks for.
Sure. Sir, in the recent past, in 2 segments, particularly one is HPP segment, where you got order from companies like Honeywell, close to 3,000 crores spread over 7 years. And second, of course, recently into, specialty chemical space. So your strike rate of winning the customer, and I would probably also say the getting more probably wallet share in the customer, both have seen a decent impressive track record in last couple of years. How do you plan to take this further, mining the customer, probably for the adjacent segment or for the new segments or for the scale up into the existing one? How do you see that opportunity? Because whenever I meet you, you always talk about increasing dollar value per customer. So what is the strategy over there?
Yeah, so I think when you talk about dollar value per customer, sometimes it sounds very transactional, but that's not really how we think about it. The real we feel that first of all, if you actually look at their total spend versus our size, there's clearly a significant headroom, right? That's point number 1. And I genuinely believe that if you execute the opportunities on the table extremely well, okay, so you deliver the project well, and then once the project is ready, you actually get the right norms, etc., and deliver as per the promise or exceed the promise, they will come back to you with repeat opportunities. Okay, because they're also looking for strong partners to work with. And our philosophy always has been that, has been of total transparency. So we almost work with them. So we typically will form a joint team and we almost work as if it's a one team. So they know as much as we know about our costs, etc. And that gives them a lot of confidence and comfort, and which then translates into a lot of repeat business. And then what also happens through that process, they also help scale up our capabilities, because every project exposes us to a completely new technology, okay, which we didn't have experience handling before. So it also becomes like an iterative process, because we, go up that value chain, which then helps another partner. Then through that partnership, we further go up, etc. But put very simply, you execute well, our partners will give us more opportunities, for repeat business.
Can you share one example?
No, so I mean, each of these companies that you're talking about, I mean, for example, we just signed an agreement, with another large customer, large multinational. We just announced a capex program with them a week or two back. Now, that was the third agreement we did with that customer. Okay, the first agreement was relatively small agreement, which was served primarily through debottlenecking that we did in our existing plant. From signing of the agreement to delivering the first molecule, the first kg, we took 8 months.
Okay.
And within a month after after our plant was ready, the product was stabilized, we were getting the right run rate, the right yields, etc. That gave them the confidence to give another molecule. Okay, that molecule because that molecule was actually at the front end of its life cycle. So it wasn't an already established molecule. So it entailed joint development. So in the first example, they got exposure to our execution capabilities in terms of operations project. In the second example, they got project. They saw our technical capabilities, where our chemistry department was, R&D department was involved, T&D department was involved, etc. Combined, they got confidence enough to be able to sign a large agreement with us, which is of very high strategic value for that company, and which entailed largest investment that Navin Flourine has ever announced. So though we've actually just made the announcement, this was basically the third agreement we signed with that customer.
I see. You are talking about that new specialty molecule.
That's correct.
Perfect. And I think it has been a great, I must say it is a great achievement by you and your team. I think it is a fantastic thing to ramp up with the same customer, and to get that kind of a comfort and confidence generally takes much longer time. So sir, coming to just, last about 3-4 minutes, 2 minutes I'll spend on a little bit on CRAMS side. In CRAMS side, what are the challenges and opportunities, and what is going to be our strategy to de-risk the fluorine-based chemistry inside the CRAMS, and how to get scale in this business? Because this is a little bit kind of a more challenging business. Volatility has been very high, the lumpiness is very high, and the scale is difficult to come by. So, what is your strategy in this segment?
No, I think this business, first of all, in this business, we believe we are uniquely positioned because of the length of relationship that we have with some of these customers, and hence the trust and comfort and confidence that these customers have on us. And some of the molecules are progressing extremely well through the pipeline, and we hope that that business will continue as we continue to service the customer for these existing molecules. And as a result of which, we are actually seeing a lot of repeat business coming in from these existing customers. But typically what happens is, the life cycle tends to be pretty long, from, let's say, the initial contact, which typically happens at a clinical phase or phase 1, to actual commercialization can be anywhere, from 7 to 10 years. So And a lot of times what happens is within that, in each of the stage, as you know, the pass-through rate is less than 10%. So out of 100 molecules we work on, let's say one molecule will finally get commercialized, or even less than that. And that you cannot influence that process. What you can influence is, as long as customer continues to work on that molecule should come to you. That is what you can influence. You cannot really influence on what happens to our customers' tests, etc. So to that extent, it's difficult to predict in terms of how the earning would grow. But at the same time, now we are getting to a stage where we've actually started building certain critical mass of opportunities. And as I've said, from the next year onwards, we will actually start reaping the benefits of that. And as the customers start getting a lot of confidence in us, now what we are seeing is customers are coming back to us, the same customers are coming back to us with non-fluoro inquiries. So we are also able to actually expand our chemistry basket to the same set of customers. So, some of these things taken together gives us a lot of confidence about the future of this business. But the challenge, as you can imagine, the business tends to be lumpy by definition because, for example, if the molecule is moving from phase 2 to phase 3 and the customer is getting itself organized for phase 3, they will typically order certain quantity from you. Okay, so in one quarter you would probably have pretty big order, and for the following 2 years they will not order anything. Because then they're converting into the final product, getting ready for the phase 3 trial. The trial would take probably 18 months, etc., etc. And you cannot time, right? So if you have 3 such opportunities in the pipeline, you can't time saying, okay, one I will do in this quarter, one I will do in the second half of this year. They could all come together, or they could, come in completely different years. So you cannot influence the outcome. You cannot influence the timing. So that becomes a little challenging to manage. So I think as a part of overall portfolio of Navin Flourine, it's great to have that, because A, the business is very sticky. B, the business tends to have very strong asset turnover, so relatively less capital intensity. And on the other side, you have specialty, which gives you a very good visibility. On the other side, you have HPP, which actually where there is a huge entry barrier because of the application fees, etc. So these 3 pieces taken together form a very strong portfolio.
Great. Last question from my side, Radhesh. It's been a wonderful discussion. Just last question. What are the challenges? What are the risk factors do you see, for a company like Navin Flourine, probably even for the industry? The tailwinds are in our favor. The world is looking at India as a sourcing base. The inflection point is there. What are the challenges?
So I think, there are some short-term challenges, which is just managing this, the raw material escalations and the cost escalations, which are both, impacting our variable cost as well as impacting, some of our project costs. So, how do you really manage through this cycle? We are not in bulk chemical. If you are on the bulk chemical side, everybody in India who's on the bulk chemical side and never wanted to get on the specialty chemical side has dropped the plan to get on the specialty chemical side because they seem to be making, a lot of money on the bulk chemical side.
Yeah.
So to that extent, short term is obviously, that's the challenge, and how do you manage that cycle and get to the other side of that piece? In short, but more mid to long term, I think the key challenge would be to manage the talent, to ensure that you continue to attract, develop, and retain the talent which will actually help you succeed in this space. Because that's going to be a big challenge for not only for Navin but for the industry.
I see. Yeah, I think probably that's a common challenge what we hear from most of the companies, because at times what kind of a skills what you are looking for, it is difficult to get it readily, and even if you get it, to retain those challenges, particularly when entire country is going through the growth phase, little bit becomes more challenging.
Right.
Great, Radhesh. I think it has been really wonderful discussion, and we got a lot of insights. into the industry, into the complexity of the industry, the kind of the success stories what is required, the secrets for the success, and I'm sure under your leadership, Navin, Flourine will continue to embark on a strong growth, the similar probably what we have witnessed in last 5-10 years. With that, Radhesh, I'm really thankful to you for your valuable time and for your valuable insights. It has been always a pleasure, interacting with you. Thanks a ton for your time.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Have a
Thanks.
good Bye-bye.
Thank you, friends. That brings end to our webinar. Thank you very much, for being present on this webinar. And the link of this webinar will be available on our website probably by weekend. Thank you, friends. Bye, Radhesh. Thank you
Bye-bye.
once again for your time. Bye bye.